Welcome to The Sober Unicorn. We are a gay-hosted, all-inclusive podcast about sobriety and addiction recovery for the LGBT plus community and all of our allies. I am your host, Holden, and thank you for joining us today. Hey, it's Holden. I am an alcoholic. I hope everybody's doing well today. Today I'm being joined by Rob.
Hello.
Hey, Rob, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you, sir?
Doing well. I'm glad you joined us. So why don't you tell everybody your age, sobriety date, and what your drug of choice was?
My age is 52 years old. My sobriety date is June 15th, 2014. My drug of choice was alcohol,
Okay.
uh, and alcohol only.
Well, I'm glad to have you on. I mean, me and Rob actually, he reached out to me via Facebook. The podcast actually popped up on a recommendation on one of the podcast venues that he listens on. And he reached out to me and actually wanted to come on here and just share his story with everybody that may be able to resonate with it. And so I'm super happy he joined us. So I know that there was a few things in your life that kind of stemmed your alcoholism. Um, could you like elaborate on some things that you went through in your early childhood and young adulthood that kind of kind of kickstarted your drinking?
Yep. First of all, thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, I reached out because I thought, with this being a gay podcast, and and me being a gay man that was living the life of a straight guy until I was about 45 years old. Um, a lot of that had to do with that didn't help my situation in terms of where I was in my head and things. So I figured it might be a good idea to reach out and just maybe there's people that listen to this podcast that are you know that are kind of going through the same things that I did. So I'll start by saying that I always growing up I always felt that I got the shitty end of the stick with certain things, particularly with my parents. I love my parents to death. I don't, my mother died when I was 6 years old. Frankly, I don't know my mother. I have one memory of her. Um, she died, she got very sick. She died of pneumonia when I was 6 years old, suddenly. Um, so I don't, I got, I felt like I got gypped out of an opportunity to have a relationship with my mother. I only have one memory of my mother, and it's cloudy at best. And then I went through, I went 10 years, and then I turned 16 years old. That during that time, my grandmother had moved in with us to help raise me while my father went to work. And one day at 16 years old, um, my father literally dropped dead in the bathroom. Um, Suddenly, everything was fine the night before, and all of a sudden, within the blink of an eye, he was gone. So I had already had some intense anger and jealousy of my other friends that had two parents and stuff like that, that I only had one parent. And then all of a sudden I wake up one day on March 19th, 1986, and now I have no parents. And that set the ball rolling for me to be a very angry individual for a very, very long time. um you know i uh I ended up, um I didn't drink right away, to be honest. I was busy. My father had left me a little bit of money. I was the only child, so everything that he had, his estate, everything went to me. And but I got the money when I was 18 years old, and I'm 18 years old, and I don't. What do I know what to do about money? I don't know anything about money, and I ended up, long story short, without going into terrible details, I squandered it away. I didn't do it on drugs or alcohol or anything like that. I wasn't even involved with that kind of stuff yet. But I lost anything that my father had. I squandered it away. It wasn't intentional. It was just because I didn't know any better. But I was extremely, extremely hard on myself for that, and I felt terrible guilt and shame over that for a lot of years. And I got to the, I was, when I realized I was broke, um, I had made a decision to kind of make up, uh, trying to make up that money. And I became very, very, very focused on trying to recapture all that wealth that I had lost. And I was doing a pretty good job of it. I ended up reaching heights that my father never reached in life. Um, and I was in a job that I was in the bakery business, and the job I had was a very, very stressful job. And um, I would work and I would get frustrated with the people at work and the situation surrounding myself. And I began, I couldn't turn my mind off. All I was thinking about was how everybody was, it was screwing me, how this world sucked, and how I was going to get back at everybody for doing me dirty. And I couldn't turn my mind off. So somewhere along the line, and I can't exactly tell you when this happened, but somewhere along the line, I found that alcohol turned, slowed my mind down and slowed my thinking down enough to where I could function. And my drinking career is probably only 3 or 4 years long or so. I mean, where it got real bad anyway. When I started drinking to self-medicate, and and it got to a point where I was drinking all the time. I was driving a bread truck drunk. I just wasn't functioning. By this time, I was married to a wonderful girl, and and we had 2 children, both wonderful kids. And I remember I would be in my house. I would be sitting in my house in my living room with a martini glass in my hand, and they would be telling me, you're an alcoholic. And I would say, no, I'm not an alcoholic, not even close to an alcoholic. You guys are just a bunch of assholes. And if you guys would just treat me better, I wouldn't have to drink. Because the resentments I had didn't just go with my people at my job. I mean, everybody I came in contact with, I hated. And I had resentments towards everybody, including the people close to me, my family. And one day back in 2000, let me think, 2016, or I'm sorry, 2006. One day I just was so exhausted from chasing everybody, or hating everybody and everything, and fighting everybody and everything. I ended up, um, my wife had just gone to work. I had just come home from the bread route. I'm in my house, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if I'm going to kill myself. I don't know what to do, but I've had it. I gave up, and something made me pick up the phone and call my wife. And I told her, you better come home because I don't know what I'm about to do. She turned around, she came home, and through a series of events, I ended up at a hospital. And by the end of the day, I was in, I ended up in a detox center. I didn't know it was a detox center. I didn't understand that. They told me I was going to a dual diagnosis center. And I said, what's that? And they said, well, we're treating you for alcoholism and depression. And I said, well, you got half of it right. I'm definitely depressed. I still did not realize I was an alcoholic at all. Never even occurred to me, despite my family telling me to my face that I was an alcoholic. So that night I walked into uh, the, the place, and they told me to go sit down in this room over here. And I sat down in a small room, and I think I was the only one in the room at the time. And then people started trickling in. And I'm going to guess there were about 12 or 13 people that sat around a table. And then all of a sudden, somebody, bangs on the table. And the guy sitting next to me says, hi, I'm Joe Blow from Kokomo, and I'm an alcoholic. And right then and there, I started to cry. I bawled because all of a sudden, they talk about a moment of clarity in the program. That was my moment of clarity. That was when I realized that I must be an alcoholic because how would a guy like me, a nice guy like me, end up in an AA meeting without even trying? There has to be a reason. There must be something to this. And that was my moment of clarity. And that is the day that I consider that my life flipped. Um, if my life was a coin, there are two sides of that coin. And that was the day that coin of my life flipped. Um, and I'd love to say I was sober since that day in 2006, but I haven't been. Um, I, you know, I've had a few relapses in there. Um, but that's where the journey started. That's where the journey started.
So I know that, like, yeah, you said you had a moment of clarity, and at this time you were still married to your wife. And of course, at the very beginning of the episode, you said that you're a gay man. So do you think the relapses stemmed from being in a marriage that was essentially a lie to yourself and your sexuality?
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And what I'm going to say about that is they talk about uh, step 4. Um, and when I first got sober back then, I got a sponsor and I did my step 4. But I couldn't even admit to myself that I was gay. I mean, I remember my father, who I thought the world of. He was a great guy, and I got nothing bad to say about him. But he did one thing in my life that I don't that I didn't like. And I remember I was with him in the car. I was a little kid. I was about 5 or 6 years old, let's say. And we're driving down the street. And we see two gay guys holding hands. And my father said to me, said he flipped out and he said to me, I don't even remember seeing them, but I remember his reaction. He goes, they should take those people and they should cut their balls off. It's exactly what he said. And I never forgot that. And I always wanted to please my father. To this day, I always want to make my father proud, right? I mean, I thought he was a great guy. I mean, with the exception of that one comment that he made, he was a good man. And I I just remember being, even back then, with that day when 5 years old, I'm like, well, what's the problem with with two guys holding hands? Like, even back then, I was attracted to the concept of two. You know what I mean? So I ended up just keeping that suppressed, and any feelings I had over the course of years, I kept suppressed for a very, very long time, to the point where I was living a lie. I mean, I went through life. I dated. I went to the prom. I did all this stuff. I get married. I have 2 children. White picket fence. I had the trappings of the American dream, um, but I was living a lie. And so my 4 step comes by the first time, right? We do the 4 step, and we're going through all these, character defects that I have, and the the fact that I'm gay is right in front of my face, and I know it, and I know that should be number 1 on my 4th step, and I don't do a damn thing about it, and I don't say a word about it to anybody. The only one that knows this is me, and as a result, um, I ended up having to do a couple of 4 steps. I relapsed, um, and I remember that when I relapsed the second time, or I'm sorry, my first relapse, I ended up at a rehab center. There's a place up here, it's called Marworth, up in Waverly, Pennsylvania. And that's where I went. And it's an old governor's mansion, from what I understand. The former governor of whoever, I don't know what his name was, but he used to live there, was the governor's residence. And at the bottom of the driveway that goes up to this big mansion where this rehab center is now, there's 2 pillars on either side of the driveway. And when I went into the meeting, when I went into that facility, the first day I was there, we go into this one room and there's a speaker in there. And the speaker says to the crowd, the audience of which I'm sitting there, and he says, leave your secrets on this side of the pillars. And I thought to myself, well, I know what my secret is. Then maybe maybe this is part of my problem. Maybe I need to say something. So it took me days to drum up enough courage to tell the counselor that was assigned to me in this facility what was going on. And I did. And I still didn't want to talk about it with a lot of different people. But that was the beginning of me, of me coming out. That was the very first time. It took another couple of years before I said it to somebody else. And, and plus there was another relapse in there and stuff. And it got to the point where, my wife and I got divorced. Um, that and it really had nothing to do with a sexuality thing. We just got divorced. I'll leave it at that. And I started hanging out with somebody, a man, and we ended up living together. And that's kind of when it came out. Um, and I'll tell you, all those situations, all those all those feelings of fear and shame that I had. I was worried. I was worried that I was worried for my children. I didn't want my children having a gay dad. I thought it was the most shameful thing in the world. Um, and I was horrified about how they might react. But they have both, I can't even describe it. They did not react like I thought. I mean, this is what happens. I mean, that's how our alcoholic thinking gets us thinking that the worst of everything, the worst outcome possible. And both of my children did not have the reaction I thought they did. And to this day, like right now, I'm presently with somebody, um, and they love the guy. They love the guy. They've embraced, they embraced who I am, and I've embraced who I am. And you know, I had a bad relationship with my wife while we were going through the divorce, and this is another topic that really I definitely should bring up as a result of sobriety. That the relationship between me and my ex-wife now is completely different than it was before. Um, it's we are dear friends today, and there was a time when we weren't friends at all. I mean, I can't even tell you how it was bitter, um, and I wouldn't forgive. And that's another thing, the forgiveness. We talk about forgiveness in this, and I wouldn't forgive. The moment I decided to forgive and not hold back resentments, and I finally let go of the resentment, that was the day my life got better. Um, and it's yielded some pretty good relationships today, including with my ex-wife.
So do you think, of course, we now have divorced your wife, we have started living your own truth and being able to tell people that you're gay and being for one being able to admit that to yourself, which can take a lot of courage and everything, especially with depending on what generation you grew up in. As you said, your father said what he said, and you didn't want your kids to have a gay dad. It was at the turning point that finally the sobriety now stuck. The fact that you weren't hiding guilt, you weren't hiding shame. And throughout that, did you finally learn that essentially that all the bullshit in your life was of your own doing?
Yes, yes. When I first got sober, I did realize that a lot of that my life was my fault. My life wasn't anybody else's fault. And it took me to get into these rooms to understand that. And I had to start taking responsibility for my own actions and different things like that. And I did that. But you were right about what you said about, like I had to convince I did not want to admit that I was an alcoholic. I didn't really believe it. I just didn't think I was. But the moment I decided that I didn't care what other people thought about it, um, was was when my sobriety really, really took off. I mean, I was sober, but I wasn't, and I was going to meetings and all that stuff. But until I looked myself in the face and admitted to somebody else that I was an alcoholic, um, that's when life changed. And this is probably one of the biggest things I want to talk about on this podcast. There's that coin. When you get a coin It says on the back of it, to thine own self be true. And I wasn't true to myself. And I didn't realize keeping that secret held a held so many other people hostage. I mean, I created a whole life for myself, a wife and two children, and whoever else I was interacting with did not nobody could tell. I mean, nobody could tell I was gay. I didn't act gay. I wasn't feminine. I wasn't, whatever. So I hid it extremely, extremely well. And when my wife and I have a relationship now where she's so supportive of what I'm doing and stuff. I invited her to my 5-year celebration. And I remember on the car ride home, we talked about my, me coming out and her learning that I was gay. And one of the things she said to me was, and I'll never forget this, this was a life-changing moment. She doesn't even, if she ever hears this podcast, she doesn't even know this happened. She doesn't even know how much of an impact it made on me. But she said to me, she said, when I found out you were gay, I was so pissed. I said, pissed? Why were you pissed? She goes, because, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't remember exactly how she said it, but she basically said, because I was trying to be a perfect wife to somebody that I couldn't be a perfect wife to. I was being held to a standard that didn't even exist. And I thought, oh my God. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. How we, we live lives because we don't want to look at ourselves, and we drag other people into the misery without even knowing it. And it's so unfair. I feel horrible about what I did to that poor woman. But the good news is, you know, we have a good relationship today. I'm a lot more comfortable person. My life is tremendous. It's
How
tremendous.
how was your step four? The Of course, as you said, you had to do several of them. So the step four that you could finally state that you were gay in and talk to your sponsor about that. How did that make you feel?
It was. I remember. I remember when I sat there across the table from the guy. It took me a long while to say it out loud. It took me a long while. But I did feel better about it. But it really wasn't until it wasn't so much my sponsor that I had to come clean with. It was the rest of society. It wasn't until I I ended up just living my life and go, like you call it living your truth. I started living my truth, and things got better, and things got better. And I was the most selfish. One my last fourth step. I mean, I was with a different sponsor, my current sponsor, and I remember, at the end of it all, basically, one of the things I learned about myself is that I'm a selfish person. We all are. All of us alcoholics are selfish, and you know, I try not to live that way today. I really, really don't. I remember when I was trying desperately to make all that money back that I lost, I was in it for me. I would work 20 hours a day and I would make all this money and I would do all these things and and but I was doing it for me, you know. And by the way, I actually lost all that money. I the second time I relapsed, I really fucked things up. I was homeless. 10 years ago, I was homeless. I was living in a sober house. My ex-wife didn't talk to me, and it was a bad scene. But I've come back, and I actually make a tremendous living now. And I run a company. I don't own the company, but I run one of their branches, and I'm a manager, and I'm a manager of people. And I realize that what I'm doing and running that company, for example, it isn't really about me anymore. I don't do what I do for me. I do what I do to help others, whether it's the company I work for, whether it's my employees or whatever. Um, I don't do it for me. If you do stuff for other people, the money comes when you do the right thing. That's one thing. I was chasing money, and the more I tried chasing the money, the less it would show up. It was very elusive. When I stopped chasing money and started living life the right way, money came not by accident, but it came easily. It came because, the universe rewards you for doing the right thing. And, I'm grateful for the place for the life I live today. Um, so if there's, my biggest thing is if there's people out there, there's probably people out here listening to this sober unicorn podcast that are closet homosexuals, and they listen to it in the car on their way to work when their wife can't hear it or whatever, because they want, they can relate to the gay people, and they need gay recovery. I think what you're doing here, I think that the program that you have and the format you have is a tremendous um, service to the gay community. And I know, I'm sure there is a lot of people out there that have a similar story, closet people that just that don't want to live their own truth. And all I can say is they really should. It changes your life.
It definitely does, and I think your story can resonate with many people, gay, straight, and otherwise, especially with people that suffer from coming to terms with who they are. Um, Whether it's because they're gay, because they're lesbian, it doesn't really matter. That's a struggle internally that eats away at us every single day that we have to lie about it. And internalizing stuff, and I think that's what we learned through the program, is holding on to bullshit, holding on to resentments, holding on to fears of what other people are thinking, because ultimately, before we came out, we held our sexuality in because, for one, we were scared of what other people were going to think, what society would feel, what your dad would think about you, stuff like that. So it's so important now to understand that, for one, of course, the program is a very selfish program at the beginning because we get sober for ourselves, but in turn we become very selfless people. As alcoholics, we were always in it for ourselves, our own selfish gain. And throughout recovery, we learned that being of service to others gives us more back in our own recovery than us just thinking that we're working it for ourselves.
Right. Absolutely. That's, the 12 steps are designed to do that. It helps us in the beginning, and those last few steps are about helping others. So you got to give it away to keep it, kind of thing. I know that's a cliche, but it's so true. And different people do it in different ways. I mean, I don't sponsor anybody. Not that I wouldn't. I'd be more than happy to sponsor anybody that would ask, but it hasn't worked out for me. I've sponsored a handful of people, but different people can do different things. You're doing this podcast. I think that's a tremendous service, and I'm sure it's helping you stay sober. And, I mean, I that's why I wanted to come on, and I appreciate you having me on, because, getting the message out is half the battle. And if this helps one person, um, you know, if this helps one person, it's worth it. It's
Yeah, and that's going into this. My sponsor kind of asked my motivation, and that was that was my motivation. If I could help, if each episode could touch one person and their addiction and help them get sober, then what we are doing here is sharing stories, talking about our struggles of our past. That's why that's why we're doing what we're doing, is to
right.
help others that are still in recovery. So before we end the episode, is there anything that you would like to share? Especially, you had mentioned being homeless 10 years ago. Is pretty much going from homelessness to your success now, is that based on solely your sobriety, like being able to obtain that?
Um, I would not have been. I would not have. Uh, I don't think I would have been. How do I say this? I had success, financial success once before, and I was a drunk, hopeless, horrible person. The difference today is I'm enjoying success, and it's not even about the material things. That's not even the success. I mean, yeah, it's nice to go from for example, when I in my worst, I had two plastic bags of clothes and a car. It's nice to go from that to having an apartment in New York, in New York State, and a house on the water here in Pennsylvania, and three cars. That's all nice, but that's not what success is. It truly isn't. True success is just being happy and knowing you're living your best life, and helping others while you do it. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, and now I'll tell you what, I always gauged success with how much money you had, always. And I don't anymore. And the odd thing about it is I have more money now than I did before. And now I view it as less important than I did back then. Um, so that's what I would say. It's you gotta live, you gotta be true to yourself and wrap your head around the fact that your life is your fault and take responsible for your own actions and don't blame other people for it. Your life will get instantly better.
That's for sure. I absolutely blamed everybody else in my alcoholism when it came to why I drank. And the reason I had to go to the bar after work was because this bitch pissed me off or this, that, and the other. When ultimately it was me. I mean, I think I always blew everything out of proportion to give myself that excuse to drink. And so I felt it was always okay because other people. So like the last question we have here before we end is, what would you say to the queer person that's struggling right now?
Um, well, I mean, I think we've effectively talked about it throughout the entire episode, but I just my message would go to the closeted guy. I think that's who I'm really trying to focus on because it made such a difference and held me back so long. I mean, I think I wasted decades of my life not living my truth. Um, you know, uh, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I mean, people, you think that people will react poorly to you to being. I don't. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people that there's when you come out, you don't get a great reaction. But the reality is, it's about it's about how you feel about it and how you can take your circumstances, get sober, and live your best life and help other people. Um, that's where that's what I think the message should be. Don't be scared. Don't live your life in the closet. It's not a good place to be. And
Okay.
you might think it is. I thought for the longest time I was doing the right thing by being who I was and acting like I was acting. And it turns out, and now that I look back at it, I look back at my life and I see. I mentioned my wife before. I mean, I look at all the destruction that I caused because I wasn't truthful. They talk about it in the book. They talk about rigorous honesty. If you're not rigorously honest with yourself, you're not being of any value to anybody.
And that is 100% true. So again, thank you, Rob, for joining us today here at the Sober Unicorn.
Thank you. Very good job you're doing. I appreciate what you're doing for this community.
Thank you again for listening to today's episode. Hit that follow button to be notified about new episodes every week. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can find us on Instagram at The Sober Unicorn Podcast or on our website at thesoberunicornpodcast.com. There you will find our episodes as well as our very own sober-owned shop featuring products from small businesses that are sober-owned. And remember everyone, don't be normal, be a unicorn, but better yet, be a sober unicorn.